This chapter unveils the finale. Joseph is permanently ensnared by the demon Marquis Asmodeus, forced into the role of Marchioness through confinement and compromise. Anna's betrayal backfires, leaving her exiled to France without her beloved brother. Years later, the demon couple encounters a French girl sharing Anna's name, echoing cyclical fate. Joseph remains the demon's cherished rose, while human greed and deceit continue their eternal dance. Chapter 11. The Marquis lowered his eyes, adjusting the ring's size. A crisp click signaled that the ring was fully fastened on Joseph's finger. "Does it look good?" Joseph looked down. The lake blue gemstone ring on his slender, pale finger created a strangely alluring contrast. The size was perfect, neither too tight to remove nor too loose. The size isn't suitable for Anna. The Marquis's expression was indifferent. "It can be adjusted later." Joseph silently removed the gemstone ring and placed it back in the box. He continued searching the room for the missing black leather book, and the Marquis didn't stop him. Instead, he picked up a book from the desk and began to read with interest. From the corner of his eye, Joseph observed the Marquis. He seemed to love reading. Books were piled everywhere in the study, not just for show like other people's. A glass vase sat on the table, holding a single, blooming crimson rose. The man beside the rose was like the demon god of legend. Handsome, mysterious, terrifying. Without desires, one could avoid temptation and stay away from disaster. With greed, one would be dragged into the abyss, unable to climb out. Joseph looked away, found a book on the shelf, and sat down to read. He figured there probably wasn't a black leather book at all. Joseph slept in the study all night. When dawn broke, he was alone in the room. A blanket covered him, and the fireplace burned warmly. He got up and returned to Charlotte's room. That room had a peculiar structure. One wall opened to reveal a study. There was a small bed in the study. That became Joseph's new room. Charlotte seemed to have completely lost interest in Joseph overnight. Pregnant, she was always running out. She used to avoid balls, but now she was always at them. At the balls, she was very close to Duke Baymon. She often went to church, saying she was praying for her unborn child. But someone saw her interacting intimately with Duke Baymon. The servants in the small manor pitted Joseph because Charlotte showed him no respect and made no attempt to hide her wanton behavior. It was truly shocking. Miss Charlotte used to be quiet and shy. Now she was like the most debauched woman in a brothel. Joseph didn't mind, continuing to live as he always had. Simple, fulfilling. Except for worrying about Anna and being wary of the Marquis of Wellington. The Marquis was a deep thinker. He resided in the abyss, and everyone's thoughts were transparent to him. Everyone in the manor was a small insect on a spiderweb, struggling in vain, ultimately dying. And he was the spider at the center of the web, mockingly toying with the foolish prey. Joseph feared him and kept his distance. When unavoidable and contact became more frequent, he tried his best to minimize his presence. As the Marquis of Wellington and Anna's wedding day approached, Joseph tried to find Anna, wanting to express his concerns to her. Anna was trying on her wedding dress. A maid helped her put on her shoes, but the dress was too long and the shoes were a bit too big. The housekeeper, Emma, made a note of it. Emma left with the maid, the wedding dress, and the jewelry. Only Joseph and Anna remained in the room. "Anna, what do you want to say to me?" Joseph voiced his worries, and Anna nodded, indicating she understood. "Anna." "Joseph, I've known the Marquis longer than you have. I understand him better than you do. Don't worry, nothing will happen to me. We'll both be fine. But promise me, Joseph, stay away from the Marquis." Joseph was silent for a long time, then reluctantly agreed, "All right." Anna hugged Joseph. "Thank you." She looked happy, happier than ever before. Joseph couldn't bear to shatter Anna's hopes. He remained worried until the wedding day arrived. As Anna's older brother, Joseph went to her room early in the morning, wanting to talk to her again. His feelings were complex now, a mix of bitterness, reluctance, joy, excitement, all intertwined. Joseph took a deep breath and knocked on the door. After a while, there was no response. He tried pushing the door and it opened. Anna wasn't in the room. Her wedding dress and jewelry were still there. Joseph found Simon and Emma. "I can't find Anna. Something must have happened to her. Today is her wedding day. She's been looking forward to it for so long, she wouldn't just wander off. Please, you must find her." The two housekeepers directed the male and female servants to begin searching the manor for the missing bride. Joseph was extremely anxious. He even wanted to go into the woods to search. Simon stopped him. "Many people get lost in the woods. Without hounds to guide you, you won't be able to get out." Upon hearing this, Joseph asked, "Could Anna be lost in there?" When the servants had searched every corner of the manor and still couldn't find Anna, Joseph stubbornly insisted that she must be lost in the woods. He was determined to go in and search, but Simon wouldn't allow it. Steward Simon ordered several footmen with hounds to surround Joseph. "I'm sorry, sir. Without the master's orders, I can't let you go in there." Joseph spoke sharply. "Are you trying to give me orders?" He tried to take hold of the ferocious-looking hounds, but they bared their teeth, threatening him. So he gave up on the hounds and attempted to enter alone, but the footmen surrounded him. Joseph was furious. He lost his usual gentleness and timidity, grabbing Simon by the collar. "If we can't find Anna, I'll kill you." Simon's expression shifted slightly, and he compromised. "Then, please allow me to inform the master." "Joseph, I'll go too." Simon hesitated, but Joseph had already gone ahead to find the Marquis of Wellington. The Marquis wasn't in his room, but in his study, attending to his affairs. When Joseph arrived, he happened to see Duke Baymon storming out angrily, bumping hard into Joseph without acknowledging him. As Joseph steadied himself, he caught a glimpse of a sash hidden in Duke Baymon's arms. The sash looked familiar. However, his mind was full of Anna, so he didn't pay much attention. Without Simon's prior announcement, he barged straight into the Marquis's study. Duke Baymon, at the end of the corridor, suddenly turned around and saw this. His eyes narrowed slightly, his expression unreadable. The Marquis sat behind his desk, watching Joseph as he stopped breathlessly in front of him. Simon tried to step forward to say something, but the Marquis raised a hand to stop him and told him to leave. "What is it?" Joseph knelt before the Marquis, raised his head, his beautiful emerald green eyes moist with pleading, "Please, my lord, save Anna." The Marquis listened silently to his halting account, then nodded in acknowledgement, stood up, and picked up a jeweled eagle-headed cane. He walked out and, after inquiring with Simon and Emma and learning that Anna could not be found, he didn't suggest sending anyone into the woods to search. Joseph followed closely behind him. Seeing this, he rushed forward. "My lord, Anna is missing. Perhaps she's in the woods. Please, let me take the hounds and go look for her." The Marquis said casually, "Why should I expend the effort to look for her?" Joseph looked at him in disbelief, murmuring, "She's your fiancée." The Marquis remained indifferent. "Anyone can be my fiancée, as long as they're exceptional enough and don't cause me trouble. Anna is a clever girl. But now she's starting to cause me trouble. Do you know how many guests have been invited to the wedding? Even the Queen has sent an envoy to offer congratulations. Everyone is eagerly anticipating it." He turned slightly, leaning on his cane, and looked at Joseph with extreme coldness and indifference. "But now the bride is missing, and I have to deal with this dreadful situation, telling them the wedding is cancelled because we can't find the bride. Perhaps she would rather run away than marry me. And then in London, York. Jokes about me will circulate eternally within high society. Tell me, who should I seek compensation from?" Joseph trembled all over, his face pale. Maybe Anna has met with misfortune, or... It's still not too late to look for her. If we find the bride, the wedding can go on, can't it? Joseph, if it were Anna, that clever girl, standing before me now, she certainly wouldn't make such a suggestion. Now, Joseph, perhaps she truly has changed her mind and hidden herself away. Don't waste any more time, return to your room and keep Charlotte company. Joseph clutched the Marquis's coattails. "I beg you, my lord, I beg you, even if it's just me and a single dog, can I go in and look for her myself?" The Marquis was unmoved, still refusing. "Go back, Joseph." Joseph gripped the Marquis's coattails tightly, gritting his teeth. Just as everyone thought he would lose his head and try to seize the Marquis, he said in a low voice, "I will find the bride for you. Will you allow someone to search for Anna in the woods?" His voice was so low that Simon and Emma couldn't hear, only the Marquis. The Marquis gazed at Joseph, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. In fact, just now, he thought Joseph would lose control and choose to attack him. If Joseph had chosen to attack him, then he might have been somewhat disappointed, because that would undoubtedly be the most foolish course of action. But Joseph didn't disappoint him. This clever, obedient, beautiful boy chose the smartest method, successfully persuading him, and at the same time, successfully pleasing him. The Marquis of Wellington placed his hand on Joseph's neck. "Then as you wish." Chapter 12. Steward Simon, accompanied by 7 or 8 footmen, led hounds and carried hunting rifles into the woods. Joseph watched them disappear before being ushered into Anna's room by the housekeeper, Emma, and the maids, who proceeded to dress him in the elaborate wedding gown. The corset was tightened, the skirt arranged, the hair styled. The maids presented antique, exquisite jewelry boxes, revealing a complete set of opulent, dazzling jewels. Emma picked up a gemstone necklace and fastened it around Joseph's neck, followed by a tiara, bracelets, and finally, earrings. Joseph didn't have pierced ears, but Emma clearly had no intention of foregoing the earrings. They were at an impasse until the Marquis arrived, leaning on his cane. "The Marchioness refuses to wear the earrings," Emma, the housekeeper, announced. Joseph's head snapped up, his gaze fixed on Emma. She lowered her eyes, unmoved. She knew he was Joseph, Charlotte's husband, yet addressed him as the Marchioness without a flicker of hesitation. The Marquis held out his hand. "Give me the earrings." Emma handed them over. Taking the earrings, the Marquis approached Joseph. A maid took his cane, freeing his hand to rub Joseph's earlobes. Joseph's ears burned, and despite his efforts to remain composed, he couldn't stop trembling. The perfectly fitted women's wedding dress, the perfectly fitted women's shoes, the perfectly fitted beautiful jewelry. Everything fit perfectly. The coincidences felt suspiciously like a long-planned conspiracy. His long eyelashes fluttered, trembling incessantly. They obscured his beautiful emerald eyes, which was a shame, the Marquis thought absently, his gaze settling on the small, delicate earlobes. Without warning, he pierced the delicate flesh with the beautiful gemstone earrings. A sharp pain shot through both earlobes, accompanied by a burning sensation. Joseph thought he could smell blood. He opened his eyes wide, tears welling up from the pain. He stood frozen, not daring to move. The Marquis leaned down and licked the beads of blood from his ears. He gazed down at Joseph, smiled, and pulled the familiar sapphire ring from his pocket, sliding it onto Joseph's ring finger. "It fit perfectly. I didn't have time to adjust the size." "Lucky," he murmured. "Isn't it?" Joseph nodded stiffly, his gaze fixed on the floor tiles. The Marquis put his arm around Joseph's waist and led him to the wedding ceremony in the Anglican church. The church was filled with guests, and footmen and maids stood in orderly rows. The cathedral's priest stood at the front, his expression solemn. It was said he had officiated the Queen's wedding. All eyes turned to the two figures as they entered the hall. Joseph recognized many faces, some familiar, some not, all staring at him with undisguised admiration. He saw the Duke of Belial's scrutinizing gaze and, standing beside him, the heavily pregnant Charlotte. Charlotte disliked Anna and probably wouldn't have attended the wedding if not for the Duke. But when her eyes met Joseph's, her casual expression suddenly changed. Joseph looked away, maintaining his composure. He could probably guess who the father of Charlotte's child was. The sash he'd seen on the Duke of Belial had also been on Charlotte. Perhaps that was why the child was still alive. If the father had been a footman or a man of low birth, Charlotte would likely have had an abortion. The Marquis of Wellington and Joseph exchanged vows before the priest, swearing before God to be faithful to their marriage. In reality, however, this marriage was built on deceit and conspiracy. A wedding between two men was inherently wrong. Joseph could even see the mockery in the Marquis' smile when the priest spoke of marital fidelity and love. Although everyone in high society constantly emphasized marital fidelity and love, their unions were, in fact, based on wealth and dowry. Having lovers outside of marriage was not uncommon. Marriage was merely a union of interest. That night, in the Marquis of Wellington's room, Joseph removed the heavy, elaborate wedding dress and the jewelry. His hair remained styled, only a few strands falling loose. He tried to remove the earrings but gave up because of the pain. He stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time. He had received no news of Anna, and those who had gone into the woods had not returned. The woods are vast and shrouded in mist, Emma, the housekeeper, had told him. Finding a frail and helpless woman is no easy task. Please be patient, madam. I'm not Anna, Joseph had said. You know that. Emma had simply stared back at him, her expression unchanged, unwilling to address him differently. It seemed that as long as Anna was missing, as long as Joseph continued to impersonate her, he would be the only mistress of Wellington Manor. The Marquis entered, and Emma finally withdrew. He, too, had removed his wedding attire and wore a thin sleeping robe. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching Joseph's back. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Joseph saw a familiar desire in the Marquis' gaze. He stood up abruptly, turning his back to the Marquis. I should leave. The Marquis rose and embraced Joseph from behind, his fingers toying with the necklace he couldn't remove. On what grounds? A wife not sharing a bed with her husband would bring shame upon the Wellington family. Joseph wrenched himself free from the Marquis' embrace and ran to the door, throwing it open. Standing there like a ghost was Charlotte. Her belly was large, and her smile was twisted with hatred. My husband as my uncle's wife. How amusing. Joseph froze, rooted to the spot. The Marquis, at some point, had appeared behind him, his gaze cold as he looked at Charlotte. His eyes drifted down to her stomach, and a strange smile played on his lips. You must be tired, Charlotte. You're mistaken. Joseph, with his back to the Marquis, only heard his calm, gentle admonition. But Charlotte's hateful expression morphed into fear, becoming even more distorted. She stumbled backward and fled without looking back. Joseph's left hand gripped the doorknob, his knuckles white. The Marquis, from behind, took his hand, gently but irresistibly prying his fingers open, one by one. Anna is a clever girl. If it were her, she wouldn't do anything to tarnish the Wellington name. Joseph, am I right? Joseph's breath hitched, his struggle suppressed by a rising panic. His hands flailed in the air, grasping for something, anything to hold on to. Like a drowning man clinging to driftwood, he clutched at the only thing that could prevent him from suffocating. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the man before him with helpless pleading. I beg you, please, spare me. The Marquis' calm smile vanished. He swept Joseph into his arms and carried him towards the bed. Poor Joseph, he didn't know that such a plea was tantamount to an invitation. Chapter 13. A clamor arose outside, like the synchronized march of heavy cavalry, making the very ground tremble. Firelight suddenly flared, seemingly engulfing the entire castle. Joseph slowly awoke from his weariness, opening his eyes and blinking, taking a long moment to come to his senses. He instinctively sought the Marquis of Wellington, but the bed was empty. The Marquis was by the window. The soaring flames were reflected through the window. A sudden panic gripped Joseph. He climbed out of bed, ignoring the ache in his lower back, and slipped on a thin nightgown before joining the Marquis at the window. Looking past Wellington, he saw a dense mass of black knights holding torches below, surrounding the small manor. At their head was none other than the Duke of Baimon. Baimon, with the air of a victor, had the manor's servants tied up and seemed to be questioning them. The night wind carried snatches of words, something about the coming of the devil. By order of the Queen. In the name of Jehovah, slay the devil. The Marquis of Wellington's lips curled into a slight smile, amusement dancing in his eyes. Very interesting. Joseph looked at him. Wellington returned his gaze and kissed the corner of Joseph's lips. Usurpation, violence, selfishness, arrogance. These are not the original sins. Stupidity is. He thinks he can control everything, his clumsy attempts at appeasement failing to conceal his foolish actions. Look at him now, so sure of his victory. Soon, that will turn to shock, fear, regret, and finally, a despairing death. Wellington sighed. Most people in the world are like this. They crave power, yet they fear and resent it. They use it and then want to destroy it completely. Yet they still search for justification to mask their ugly intentions. Tedious and self-righteous, but when you think about it, quite entertaining. Joseph lowered his gaze. The night wind billowed his wide sleeves, revealing the purple bruises on his wrists. His lips trembled, but he didn't try to argue, rage, or curse, a futile gesture. Wellington continued, "And you, clever and obedient, loyal and beautiful. You are 1 in 10 million, and I am fortunate to have captured you." Joseph heard these sweet words, yet felt only greater fear. It meant he couldn't escape. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Simon the butler's voice sounded. "My lord, the guests have arrived at the door. I believe you need to greet them personally." Joseph turned sharply and followed the Marquis to the door. "Sir, kind sir, tell me how Anna is?" Simon glanced at the Marquis before replying to Joseph. "Miss Anna is fine. She is resting in her room. Please refrain from disturbing her for now." The Marquis tapped Joseph's hand twice with his index finger. "Go back to sleep. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not come out." He gazed at Joseph, a smile in his eyes. "Good boy. You're a smart boy. You know how to behave so as not to anger me." Joseph watched the Marquis leave, catching sight, at the last second, of his pupils turning suddenly red. The eyes of a devil. The door closed, and Joseph collapsed onto the carpet. After an unknown amount of time, chaos erupted outside, screams rising and falling as flames engulfed the manor, making Joseph feel as if he were in hell. Suddenly, the door before him was pushed open, and Anna burst in like a warrior who had fought her way through thorns, dressed in a maid's uniform, her expression tense. Anna saw at once what Wellington had done to Joseph. She gritted her teeth, her expression icy. But she restrained her fury and tossed a coat from the hanger to Joseph. "Put this on. We're leaving immediately." Joseph fumbled with the buttons, then looked at Anna, stunned. "Don't you love the Marquis? Didn't she yearn to be his wife, to become a member of the upper nobility?" Joseph felt momentarily lost. Anna pulled open Joseph's collar, saw the purple marks there, and looked deeply at Joseph. "Let's go, while the Queen's army has the manor surrounded. We have to leave quickly. I'll tell you everything on the way." Joseph's heart sank, heavy as a stone, plummeting into the depths. He was led away by Anna, the panicked cries of the maids and servants echoing in his ears. Flames licked upwards as the Duke of Baimon ordered his men to pile dry branches and thorns against the castle walls and set them alight. The firelight and screams intertwined into a bloody scene. With a bang, he plunged into the deep sea with no escape. Amidst the chaos, Anna and Joseph actually found a way out, passing through the thickets and gradually moving away from the castle. Joseph looked back and saw, in the distance, the castle engulfed in flames, while the woods remained deathly silent. They crossed the woods and reached a forest path where a carriage was waiting. Luggage was stowed inside, and a silent coachman sat atop. Joseph helped Anna into the carriage, and she urged the coachman to leave quickly. Only after they were far from the manor did Anna relax, the tension draining from her. From the castle, through the woods, to the carriage on the path, everything clearly indicated premeditation. Otherwise, how could Anna, lost in the woods, have so easily found her way to the path? And what roles were Baimon, the Queen, and everyone else playing? Joseph shivered, hugging himself against the cold, and asked in a low voice, "Anna, don't you love the Marquis? Didn't you long to be his wife? Didn't she long for happiness?" So even when he felt fear, despair, and terror, he thought about holding on, at least so as not to upset Anna. But now, what was all this? Anna's voice was high-pitched, her suppressed excitement and anticipation breaking through. She said, "That was true at first. I didn't lie to you, at least not at the beginning. Then what about later? Had it all been a lie? Don't look at me like that. Your eyes break my heart." Anna embraced Joseph. The Marquis of Wellington is indeed a promising and incredibly handsome gentleman. Any lady, even a princess, would fall in love with him and want to marry him. If they hadn't gotten close to him, of course. Not everyone is as calm and rational as I am. I mean, perhaps those ladies, even after getting close to the Marquis and understanding his true nature, would still fall madly in love with him. He is the devil of legend, possessing the power to tempt even the gods to fall. But I am a girl with nothing, so I am more clear-headed. Love will not become a poison that controls me. The Marquis saw my ambition, and he made a deal with me. In truth, she was still seduced by that man. Only others were seduced by love, while she, having discarded that love which could only serve as gilding, was captivated by wealth and status. Wellington was a truly terrifying man. She was transparent before him, and thus willingly entered the web he wove, becoming a pawn in his game. And the Marquis of Wellington promised her a place in high society, glory, and inexhaustible wealth. A pawn. More accurately, bait, to lure out the restless desires lurking in the darkness, and then catch them all in one net. Does this have something to do with the Duke of Baimon, or rather, the Queen? Anna let out a sarcastic laugh. The Queen can no longer tolerate him. He must die. Joseph asked softly, "Why?" Anna replied, "The hound has grown, its fangs too sharp. When the master fails to provide enough food to satiate it, it turns its gaze towards the lambs. The master's interests are threatened, so the strong and useful hound has no reason to exist." The Wellington family once helped the Queen slaughter and plunder on the new sea routes, acquiring vast treasures. The previous Marquis of Wellington did not die of illness, but because he failed to deliver the treasures seized from the Spanish fleet to the Queen. He was secretly executed. The executioner was the Duke of Baimon. After inheriting the title and estate, the current Marquis of Wellington was ordered to hand over the missing shipload of treasure. Unable to do so, he was sentenced to death again. Anna's smile was strange. Unfortunately, he came back to life. But who knows whether what returned was a devil or a man? The development of the New World was abandoned midway due to lack of funds, as was the slave trade on the new sea routes. The Duke of Baimon, deceived by the Marquis of Wellington, suffered heavy losses. He later invested his entire fortune in the new sea routes, only for the law abolishing the slave trade to immediately pass. So he hates Wellington with a passion. He seduced and deceived Charlotte, but after realizing she was of little use, he shifted his target to me. That's why I became a pawn, to beguile Baimon and in turn, deceive the Queen. In short, the Queen is determined to kill him. Joseph's heart tightened. He looked at Anna's excited face, but his mind replayed the Marquis of Wellington's parting words. Each word and phrase dissected itself within his heart, along with Wellington's meaningful gaze and seemingly effortless composure as he left. Look at him now, so sure of his victory. Soon, that will turn to shock, fear, regret, and finally, a despairing death. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not come out. Good boy. You're a smart boy. You know how to behave so as not to anger me. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not come out. Do not anger me. Do not come out. Do not leave. Joseph suddenly gasped, gripping Anna's wrist tightly. The carriage? Whose carriage is this? Anna replied, the Duke of Baimon's. Tears streamed down Joseph's face. You betrayed the Marquis? Anna said, it's not betrayal. He stole my precious treasure first, the only thing I have. How could he use me and then, behind my back, steal you? Anna was furious. The first time she was ill and couldn't attend the banquet, She had the idea of having Joseph impersonate her. It was a terrible idea, and she regretted it. Anna had seen Wellington bringing Joseph back that night and sensed something was amiss. After all, Wellington wasn't nearly so warm towards her. The second illness was forced upon her by the Marquis. He demanded that she search Charlotte's room for letters exchanged with Baimon while Charlotte was away, and also that she attend the banquet. Deliberate. He had accurately grasped Anna's psychology. Anna wouldn't let Joseph get involved in their dealings, nor would she give up halfway. And she thought she could control the situation, at least preventing Joseph from falling into the Marquis's hands. But she never expected the Marquis to abandon her in the woods on their wedding day. By the time she made it out of the woods, Joseph and the Marquis were already married. That devil had seized upon everyone's self-righteousness, causing them to stumble again and again. But he would also be tripped up by his own arrogance. Just thinking about Wellington's shock at discovering her betrayal, about the entire manor surrounded by black knights, about Wellington's head separated from his body, brought Anna comfort. We'll leave London, leave Great Britain, and go to France. Do you remember? Grandmother said that if I were born in France, I would be the most beautiful countess. Yes, Joseph, I have a French earldom. Our true happiness is about to begin. Anna grew increasingly joyful, while Joseph's sense of foreboding deepened. Joseph slowly shook his head, his mind in turmoil. Firelight, bloodlight, the twisted and pained faces of men and women, Anna's words alternating with the Marquis's warnings in his ear, finally settling on those blood-red eyes. Weakly and uneasily, he whispered, "No, Anna, we may have both made a mistake. We are angering him." Anna said, "What? Angering who? Are you talking about the Marquis? Ha! His head and body should be separated by now." Bang! The carriage struck something, suddenly flipping over. The horses neighed and bolted wildly. The two inside tried to steady themselves but were thrown around violently. The carriage body suddenly detached, crashing into the side of a hill. Joseph barely managed to lift his head before throwing himself over Anna, shielding her with his body. The violent impact left Joseph dizzy, and darkness descended. Then pain brought him back. He tried to move but managed only to twitch his fingers. His forehead had struck something sharp, and warm blood trickled down his temple. Joseph looked down, wanting to call out to Anna. She lay unconscious in his arms, with some bruises from the impact, but otherwise unharmed. But she was in a deep sleep, for reasons unknown, and wouldn't wake no matter how he called. The oil lamp, buried in the mud, suddenly went out, and darkness rapidly spread. Silence descended. Joseph could hear his own breathing. He curled up inside the broken carriage, trying to hide Anna, but he still heard the tap-tap-tap of a cane on the ground. Slow, unhurried footsteps, gradually approaching. Flutter! A raven's feather drifted before his eyes. A black raven with blood-red eyes landed on the carriage's remains, staring, silently staring, at the man who emerged from the swirling black mist. Blood-red eyes, emerging from the black fog, the devil himself. Chapter 14. The carriage door opened from the outside. A tall, handsome devil, backlit by the moonlight, looked down at Joseph. Joseph clutched the unconscious Anna tightly, his head bowed, revealing a pale, beautiful neck marked with bruises. Drops of blood trickled from his forehead, each one rolling down like the petals of a magnificent crimson rose, landing on his porcelain skin in a breathtakingly beautiful display. Joseph squeezed his eyes shut and sobbed, pleading, "Please spare us, I beg you. I implore you, let Anna go. She didn't betray you on purpose." He trembled with fear, a pitiful sight. Anyone who saw him would soften their heart, grant all his requests, and strive to make him smile. The Marquis of Wellington extended his hand, black, sharp fingernails seeming to be wreathed in black mist. Those pale, powerful hands gripped Joseph's wrist, pulling him away from Anna and into his arms. Anna fell onto the carriage floor, but thankfully the carriage was carpeted with a soft rug, and she was unharmed. Joseph looked back, his eyes opening to see Anna's golden hair spread out as she lay unconscious. Tears rolled silently down his cheeks. He stared at Anna, reluctant to blink, a premonition in his heart that they might never see each other again. The Marquis of Wellington lifted Joseph, his hand pinching Joseph's chin, turning it to face him. He licked the blood from Joseph's cheek. And Joseph finally saw the Marquis's true face, far more handsome and beautiful than he had imagined, blood-red eyes revealing the boundless evil within. A dark, boundless abyss unfolded behind the Marquis. In the black mist, rotting skeletons seemed to wail. Joseph's pupils constricted, his terror reaching its peak. But upon seeing the Marquis's true face, he calmed down. His body, which had been convulsing, gradually stilled. It turned out that all his fear stemmed from speculation about the unknown. Once he understood, the deep fear subsided. Joseph clutched the Marquis's lapel with one hand. He didn't scream, nor did he lose control and question. Instead, he pleaded, "Can you let Anna go? I didn't try to run away on purpose. I promise I won't run again. Please. Spare Anna." No one can snatch a treasure from the devil's hand. And no one can escape from the devil's side. Joseph had already guessed as much, so he hadn't entertained the unrealistic notion of escaping. He only prayed for Anna's safety and happiness. The Marquis gazed at Joseph silently, his eyes devoid of emotion, cold as ice. After a long while, he pulled Joseph into his arms. "There won't be a next time." Joseph froze, then sighed in relief, gradually relaxing his body against the Marquis. The Marquis held him and turned, stepping into the black mist. Over the Marquis's shoulder, Joseph saw the usually silent and quiet butler, Simon, standing by the carriage, his expressionless face bidding them farewell. With him there, at least Anna wouldn't be torn apart by the venomous snakes and black wolves in the forest. Joseph closed his eyes and fell asleep. The Lord would not save him. The gods ignored his prayers, because he was guilty. He had committed the terrible sin of murder, and he would go to hell after death. Now, the devil had captured him. It was only what he deserved. Joseph wouldn't resent the Lord or the gods, wouldn't resent anyone, because resentment was futile and would only plunge him into greater suffering. No matter how dire the circumstances, he would live. The housekeeper Emma and the maids, who should have perished in the fire, appeared in the hall, quiet and composed, awaiting the Marquis of Wellington's arrival. They were like ghosts that had wandered Wellington Castle for 1,000 years, indifferent and emotionless, like puppets. At dawn, Joseph was brought back to Wellington Castle by the Marquis of Wellington. The journey from the castle on the outskirts of London to Wellington Manor, which normally took several days, was shortened to 2 hours. The Marquis of Wellington carried Joseph directly into his own room, a place no outsider had ever set foot in, filled with books, famous paintings, and oriental bone china. Mysterious, luxurious, and full of heritage. Joseph curled up on the edge of the bed. The Marquis of Wellington brought a clean, warm cloth and carefully wiped away the blood and dirt from Joseph's face, including the dirt on his fingers, leaving nothing untouched. The interaction between them was excessively quiet, yet also strangely harmonious. Having accepted his fate, Joseph was no longer so afraid of the Marquis of Wellington. He always found a way to make himself a little more comfortable in a bad situation. After wiping Joseph's fingers clean, the Marquis kissed the corner of Joseph's lips, a lingering and tender touch that bewildered Joseph. Until a cold piece of iron clamped around his ankle, Joseph shuddered, abruptly pushing the Marquis away and seeing the exquisite iron chain binding his ankle. Joseph looked at the Marquis in shock. The Marquis reached out a finger, stroking Joseph's neck, slowly moving downwards, murmuring a soft sigh. "The first time I saw you, I knew you were suited to be pampered in a greenhouse. Although you could be a wild rose, anyone who saw you would want to possess you, to move you to a greenhouse and keep you in their sight." Carefully holding and pampering him, giving everything to coax a smile from him. Whatever he said, they would agree without reason. With an exceptionally beautiful appearance and an air of innocence, he had suddenly stumbled into a banquet full of wolves, feigning indifference and worldliness, yet actually apprehensive and cautious, like a lamb. If he hadn't been there that night, Joseph would have been snatched and devoured by the pack of ravenous men and women. The Marquis pushed Joseph down onto the bed, kissing him deeply for a long time. "Joseph, you're a clever child. If you had the chance, you would definitely choose to run away. Once the time was right, once you were sure Anna was safe and sound, and you had no more attachments, you would leave." Joseph clutched the sheets beneath him, breathing heavily. Hearing the Marquis's words, his heart tightened. He lowered his eyes, not daring to meet the Marquis's all-seeing gaze. The Marquis said, "So, until you get used to it, you'll stay in this room." Joseph felt a chill permeate his body, the biting cold making him involuntarily curl up, seeking refuge in the warm bed. But even the warmest blanket couldn't dispel the coldness spreading from his ankle. The Marquis nibbled affectionately on Joseph's ear. "Good boy, have a good sleep. When you wake up, you'll be the Marchioness of Wellington." Chapter 15. The air seemed to distort. A breeze stirred, carrying a salty, fishy scent. Sea breeze, a night sea breeze. The Hebridean sea breeze is fierce. It circled in the distance, then suddenly arrived. The window flew open with a crack as the wind poured in. White curtains billowed, and rose petals scattered from the vase on the table. The sea wind brought the smell of the ocean, the news of a distant storm, and some unknown secret. The half-soul floating in the air heard a strange sound and drifted towards it. Hiding outside the door, peering through the crack, he saw Uncle George on top of his daughter. The girl's gray eyes were vacant, soulless. Joseph fled in terror, running through the corridors, through the crisscrossing streets and alleys of the Hebridean town, until he reached the harbor. Stretching out his hands, he saw himself grow from a small boy into a beautiful youth. He was more beautiful and delicate than Anna. Uncle George and his father looked at them with increasingly strange eyes, the same way Uncle George had looked at his daughter. One night, Joseph and Anna were playing, and they swapped clothes. Joseph put on a dress, and his father saw him. His eyes were bizarre, and a strange, guttural sound escaped his throat. Joseph was uneasy. He returned to his room and changed, and no matter how much Anna begged, he refused to wear the dress again. Waking again from a nightmare, Joseph's heart pounded with fear. Panicked and helpless, he went to find Anna. He heard Anna scream. He burst into the room and saw Uncle George, trousers down, on top of a terrified Anna. Joseph lost control. When he came to his senses, Uncle George, a pair of scissors protruding from his back, was buried in a pit on the hill. Anna trembled beside him. Joseph held her, telling her not to be afraid, that no one would ever hurt her again. Under the moonlight, the blood-stained youth was captivatingly beautiful. 6 months later, his father, drunk, collapsed by the roadside and froze to death in the night. His grandfather saw Joseph as a demon, loathing and despising him. Joseph became silent, more gentle, and more inconspicuous. The half-soul floating in the air heard a strange sound and drifted towards it. Hiding outside the door, peering through the crack, he saw Uncle George on top of his daughter. The girl's gray eyes were vacant, soulless. Joseph fled in terror, running through the corridors, through the crisscrossing streets and alleys of the Hebridean town, until he reached the harbor. Stretching out his hands, he saw himself grow from a small boy into a beautiful youth. He was more beautiful and delicate than Anna. Uncle George and his father looked at them with increasingly strange eyes, the same way Uncle George had looked at his daughter. One night, Joseph and Anna were playing, and they swapped clothes. Joseph put on a dress, and his father saw him. His eyes were bizarre, and a strange, guttural sound escaped his throat. Joseph was uneasy. He returned to his room and changed, and no matter how much Anna begged, he refused to wear the dress again. Waking again from a nightmare, Joseph's heart pounded with fear. Panicked and helpless, he went to find Anna. He heard Anna scream. He burst into the room and saw Uncle George, trousers down, on top of a terrified Anna. Joseph lost control. When he came to his senses, Uncle George, a pair of scissors protruding from his back, was buried in a pit on the hill. Anna trembled beside him. Joseph held her, telling her not to be afraid, that no one would ever hurt her again. Under the moonlight, the blood-stained youth was captivatingly beautiful. 6 months later, his father, drunk, collapsed by the roadside and froze to death in the night. His grandfather saw Joseph as a demon, loathing and despising him. Joseph became silent, more gentle, and more inconspicuous. Chapter 16. Countess of France. This was the title Anna dreamed of. When she finally achieved it through painstaking schemes, she lost her most precious treasure. Anna awoke in the carriage headed towards her domain, acutely aware that she had lost Joseph. Because of her arrogance, pride, and foolish greed, she had fallen step by step into the devil's trap, ultimately sacrificing her most precious treasure in exchange for worthless wealth and status. Across the boundless plains, a fine mist hung in the air. Green shoots sprouted from the earth. Spring had arrived. Spring in the Hebrides meant a rising sea level and raging storms on the open water, while the town experienced only a gloomy drizzle. Sometimes, conversely, rain would fall on the town while the sea remained calm. But after the rain, when the sun emerged from the clouds, it shone just as brightly. After the rain, Joseph would take Anna to the harbor to borrow a small fishing boat and go out to sea. The sunlight would catch Joseph's golden hair. Anna had been envious of Joseph's beauty, envious of his golden hair, even more beautiful than her own, but this did not diminish her love for him. When she was 14, Joseph killed her Uncle George for her. At 15, with a single lie, Anna caused Joseph's covetous father to freeze to death in the streets. Joseph knew everything but said nothing, silently standing before her, shouldering the burden of that lie. The people of the Hebrides regarded Joseph as an ill-omened devil, surrounding him with slander and abuse. Anna loathed the Hebrides. She loathed the people, the poverty, and all the sordid thoughts that festered there. She always fantasized about leaving one day, going to France, and becoming a noble countess. The Duke of Wellington's grave illness presented an opportunity to escape the Hebrides, a fleeting chance that made Anna weep in despair. But if she left the Hebrides, she would never return. So Anna quickly recovered her spirits. Even if she couldn't inherit Wellington Manor, she could at least choose a gentleman of sufficient means to marry at the ball. As it turned out, she chose the Duke of Wellington. Although she couldn't see through him, knowing he didn't love her, what did it matter? Love could not stop her pursuit of status and wealth. The Duke of Wellington soon revealed his intentions. Admittedly, Anna felt a momentary pang of disappointment, but she cleverly agreed to the bargain. During her first illness, she refused to miss the opportunity. Anna remembered playing dress-up with Joseph as children, swapping identities. That was the first time the Duke of Wellington and Joseph met, and Joseph quickly caught the Duke's attention. During her second illness, with no other choice, she feigned grave illness, pushing Joseph once again into the center of the devil's web. Anna thought she could use her cleverness to deceive the Duke of Wellington. She thought she could outsmart him. In the final moments, she stabbed the Duke. Anna pushed open the carriage door and asked the coachman, "The Queen?" "No, I meant to ask, how is the Duke of Wellington?" The coachman shrugged. "Who's that?" "Ma'am, don't ask me about lords and ladies. I don't know everyone. But if you want to ask about the Queen, then I can tell you." "The Queen?" Anna stared intently at the coachman. What could have happened to the Queen? The coachman replied, "There was a fire in London, you know? Heard it started in a manor house outside the city. Sounds terrible. I almost thought we'd have another nightmare. Of course, it didn't spread, just burned down a nearby village. The Queen was frightened, fell gravely ill, and they say she won't make it. Who knows? God save Great Britain." Anna's face turned pale. She knew who was behind it. The Duke of Wellington. She hadn't expected that even the Queen would fall prey to him. She had made one mistake. She had angered the Duke. Joseph had been right. He was always smarter than her. The carriage sped on, leaving clear tracks in its wake, heading towards the distant horizon. The beautiful young lady covered her face and wept, while the coachman offered clumsy comfort. "Hey, ma'am, don't get upset. We haven't reached France yet." The drizzle soaked the road, the muddy ruts covered over and over again, eventually obscuring the initial tracks. A gentle breeze drifted across the plains, from one end to the other, swirling softly as it reached the hills, brushing against the hair of a busy maid in the manor house. Faintly, a whisper could be heard, laden with longing. "Joseph." In the Duke of Wellington's room at Wellington Manor, Joseph, curled up on the bed reading, suddenly looked up, his gaze wandering. He looked out the window at the misty drizzle. Spring has arrived. Chapter 17. The priest of York Minster, invited to preach at a small chapel in the countryside, was a guest of the Baroness. Mid-sermon, the Baroness's butler hurried in and whispered a few words in her ear. The Baroness immediately stood up, utterly astonished. Oh dear, are you certain? Good heavens, how terribly rude of me. I must go at once." The Baroness nodded an apology to the priest and hastily departed. After inquiring, the priest learned that the Duke of Wellington and his wife had arrived at the manor. He shrugged, unconcerned. While packing his Bible, he suddenly recalled the beautiful young man he had encountered at York Minster. He had later made inquiries and learned that the poor Duchess of Wellington's only brother had died of illness, and his wife had followed him to the grave a few months later, leaving behind a newborn son. Truly tragic. The priest thought about this as he left, and out of curiosity, glanced up at the carriage parked at the manor gates. As luck would have it, the Duchess was just alighting. She wore the latest fashions, her figure remarkably elegant, taller than most women, though undeniably slender and frail. Her long golden hair and fair skin gave her a unique and mysterious air. She lifted the black netting of her bonnet, revealing a beautiful and captivating face. Her emerald eyes were more stunning than any gemstone. However, for the priest, her beauty was eclipsed by the profound shock of recognition. The Duchess of Wellington looked exactly like the handsome young man he had seen at York Minster. The priest questioned those nearby and learned that the Duchess and her brother had been near identical in appearance. Since her brother's death, the Duchess has been inconsolable, often believing herself to be her deceased brother. Fortunately, the Duke of Wellington deeply loves his wife and remains devotedly by her side. Oh, the only pity is that the Duke doesn't wish his wife to be seen in public. I dare say, if the Duchess of Wellington were a regular presence at balls, she would undoubtedly be the rose of the empire. The priest concurred. Indeed, a pity. He felt sympathy for the beautiful Duchess and hoped she would soon recover from the shadow of her brother's death. Chapter 18. Anna Brown was born into a wealthy family in France. Her ancestors were nobles, and she'd heard they were even distinguished counts, just like her name. France is adjacent to England, but Anna had never been to England. After graduating high school, she received an acceptance letter from the University of York and spent a month traveling around England. Finally, she arrived in York. York has a long history, with the ancient York Minster and city walls. Its streets and alleys are rich with the charm of time. These old stone houses basked in the summer sun. Pedestrians strolled leisurely, and time seemed to slow down. Anna, holding her camera, shuttled between rivers, lakes, streets, alleys, and shops, capturing many interesting scenes. When she arrived at York Minster, she was photographing the massive stained glass window. Sunlight streamed in, and following the beam through her lens, she saw a beautiful young man. He wore ordinary British attire, his features exquisitely handsome, his emerald eyes filled with vulnerability and mystery. His every movement was graceful and elegant, as if he had stepped out of the Middle Ages. Anna was stunned. When he turned to leave, Anna instinctively chased after him. She searched the entire cathedral but couldn't find the handsome man. However, at the cathedral door, she saw him stop in front of a simple black car. A white-gloved steward opened the door and respectfully invited the handsome man to enter. Another man sat in the back seat. Anna couldn't see him clearly but noticed he wore the same blue gemstone ring on his finger as the handsome man. The man inside extended his hand, and the handsome man, as if accustomed to it, gave him his hand. He was about to leave. Wait. Anna ran over and arrived in front of him just as the man turned around, startled. Excuse me, could I invite you to be my model? The man didn't answer her but stared intently at her, his eyes filled with an inexplicable emotion, as if he were looking through her at someone else. Thinking she had been too abrupt, Anna quickly explained, "You are so handsome, with a very unique temperament. I would like to invite you to be my model. Would you consider it?" The man didn't answer but asked her, "What is your name?" Anna Brown. I'm from France." The man suddenly smiled and nodded, replying very gently, "My name is Joseph." Anna's eyes lit up, almost mesmerized. Just then, she saw a man get out of the car, take Joseph's hand and whisper, "It's time to go back." He was also a stunningly handsome man, the kind that made one want to scream, but Anna inexplicably disliked him. Don't ask her why. Perhaps she just happened to dislike this type of person. Joseph looked up, a pleading look in his eyes. Even so, he was still intoxicatingly gentle. Probably no one could refuse such a look. Agars, the demon once known as the Marquis of Wellington, was willing to indulge his wife of several centuries, willing to agree to requests he didn't like for the sake of this gentle gaze. Joseph, Lance? Agars, no more than half an hour. Joseph gave a delighted smile and turned to invite Anna Brown. "Would you accept my invitation for afternoon tea?" Anna Brown was overjoyed. "I would be honored." Although that unlikable figure remained by Joseph's side, Anna happily chatted with Joseph about everything. Joseph gazed at her tenderly, making Anna unconsciously become gentle and peaceful. She watched the disliked man arrange everything for Joseph, even cutting his steak for him, powerful and focused, the kind of attentiveness that came from constant care. She watched the unspoken understanding between Joseph and the man, the way they communicated with a single glance, a connection no one could penetrate. She gradually grew quiet. Joseph asked, puzzled, "What's wrong?" "Anna, are you a couple?" "Couple, not fiancé, wife, or husband, but simply partners, a pair." Joseph lowered his eyes, then after a moment, looked up and smiled, "Yes." The man beside him glanced at Joseph and held his hand, their two gemstone rings shimmering together. After a long while, Anna also smiled with understanding. "That's wonderful.